Lanier, who just talked, and I have been working on some of this biofuels, climate change, and irrigation stuff for quite a while. And so what I wanted to talk about today is I wanted to kind of compare different sort of scenarios and say which of those three different scenarios might play out quite importantly. So we're looking at the Waxman Markey bill and sort of carbon offset markets, but I'm going to go ahead and skip sort of a cap and trade discussion and move straight on to sort of a carrot-based carbon incentive program. And I'll talk about implications of irrigation declines and also the potential for a biomass market that is probably at some point fairly close to becoming a reality. And then which of those three effects would sort of make the largest impact on income in the state, and potentially also a little bit where. The alluvial aquifer, which is the main source for water here in the delta, seems to be declining in level, and what we've been doing in our modeling efforts is kind of tracking what's going on if we were to go ahead and have to curtail irrigation, what that would do to acreage allocations and income as such. So I'm not going to spend much time on this except to tell you that on the left hand side those were measurements by USGS in 1997, and red is bad, or the darker color is bad. In 2006 it seems to be getting more red, so it's not a problem that's going away. And so what we've done is we've put together a county maximizing profit model that looks at all the different row crops, also hay and pasture, and constrains that model by historic harvested and irrigated acreage limits. So you don't get corner solutions that say we're going to go and grow all dryland crops or only the most profitable crop. There's some restrictions in there. And what we've done is we've modeled all of this stuff specific to different counties to take account of what the typical county extension recommendations are for different production methods throughout the state. And what that allows us to do is it says specific to 2007 in this case, to 2007 production costs and production technology methods that have been employed, how can we maximize the state net returns to agriculture within those limits by changing perhaps the acreage around by modeling the profitability. Okay? And then we've added to the model the carbon emissions, be that direct emissions from fuel use, be that N2O emissions from nitrogen applications, or be that methane emissions from paddy rice production. And then we've added also to it, on the basis of the yields that are observed in the different counties, how much biomass is being produced by that plant, because some of that biomass will be in the root zone and will sequester some carbon, and some of that will be in the crop residue that's not harvested and may be incorporated via tillage, and so some of that carbon is going to end up in the soil as well. And then we've also added a tree crop, pine trees for that matter, to kind of say, what if we put a dedicated biomass crop in there that's also dedicated for sequestering more carbon, but not only in the soil, but also in the timber, okay? And so we've got 4 different models. We've got a baseline without irrigation restrictions, without a carbon offset market, and without a biomass market, to kind of figure out what the baseline greenhouse gas carbon footprint is for the state. And then we restrict the amount of water that we let into the region and see what the impact of that is. And then we put in a carbon offset program that says if you lower your carbon footprint per acre, then we'll give you $15 per ton for carbon. But if you increase your carbon footprint, you have to pay $15 per ton of carbon, which is not current legislation, by the way. And we've also put a low input hay enterprise in there that's very low in emissions, and is somewhat like a CRP program where you kind of set aside land with the addition of one harvest, however, for a potential biomass market. And then we put a biomass market in there for hypothetical switchgrass and also for corn stover that we think would be profitable to produce for a 40-ton biomass market for a machine like Sammy Sadaka has been showing out there to convert some of this biomass to fuels. So now the model expands. Instead of having 12 different crop enterprises, we have 17 different cropping enterprises, including pine on cropland and pine on pasture land. and then switchgrass on cropland, and this CRP type idle land. And we've put in an economic incentive for these carbon payments as well. Okay, and so here are some of the initial baseline assumptions that we make. And before I talk too much about this, I'm not going to talk about all these numbers. I just want you to see some trends in that table. Again, we use 2007 numbers. Our baseline is pretty close to what happened in the state. Here are the prices that we used. You know, for soybeans we're at $7, for rice we're at $10 per hundredweight. The profitability per acre is again based on 2007. The highest profit is on rice, followed by corn, and then we've got cotton and some sorghum doing pretty well. The soybeans not doing that hot at that $7 price, and then wheat's pretty profitable. And then on the right hand column we have the average net carbon footprint for those. And when you put methane on the rice from the paddy rice emissions, which is subject to debate, but if you put that in there, then you've got rice in at 1,600 pounds carbon equivalent per acre emitting, and you've got pine down here right around 3,000 pounds sequestering, but not only sequestering that in the soil but also in the timber products. So we've got two sort of extremes in terms of crop in terms of crops. On the emission side, this is a breakdown of where the emissions come from. You see a lot of it comes from fertilizer and N2O emissions. That's particularly important for corn, wheat, and rice. And then you've got also herbicide and harvest aided emissions that play a larger role in cotton and soybeans. There's no N2O emissions for soybeans because they produce their own nitrogen. In terms of net carbon footprint, then you have on the left-hand side of the graph the sequestration aspect, what's moving into the soil or into the timber products, and a ranking from the most sequestering crop, which would be pine on cropland, all the way down to soybeans that are double cropped on the bottom there. And on the right-hand side, you have your emissions with and without the N2O emissions from nitrogen fertilizer, and in the case of rice, also methane emissions from the paddy rice. So we've reordered that into crops that are emitting and crops that are sequestering. Leading the pack with emissions is rice, and then comes irrigated cotton, dryland cotton, wheat, soybeans, and after that we're into the sequestration side of things. Okay, and so that kind of gives you a visual impact of what's going on in the state. The left-hand column now, we've got the results. That shows how many acres, and it's in thousands of units. We got about 1.5 million acres of rice in the baseline, and so on and so forth all the way down. We've got about 8 million acres harvested acreage, of which 4.5 million are irrigated. We don't currently produce biomass in the sense that it's trapped for biomass conversion to fuels. We have a base emissions of 3,000 tons of GHG emissions, but a net carbon footprint that's actually negative of 449,000 tons as a result of that sequestration that's going on. And we have estimated state returns of about $707 million. And when you put the irrigation restriction on there, which is a function of how much water is currently in the ground, then you see obviously some reductions in the irrigated acreage, and a fairly significant reduction also in the net returns to the tune of about $122 million. The emissions go down because some of these input intensive crops that have a large emissions footprint because of irrigation and so on and so forth, those are getting reduced in acreage, and so your carbon footprint actually moves down to minus 459 in terms of emissions relative to the base. And you also reduce carbon sequestration, and that then lowers the net carbon footprint not only by the 459,000 tons of emissions, but only by 186,000 tons, because those green crops that are irrigated would also sequester more carbon, right? And then you have an offset program that's assuming that there is no irrigation restriction, and the picture looks quite a bit different. We're adding some of this low input hay or CRP like hay getting some biomass production, and increasing state returns by about $250,000. That's without this dedicated carbon sequestering crop of pine. Now you throw pine into the mix, and now you see that we're starting to pick up a bunch of pasture acres and a bunch of crop acres to the tune of nearly 550,000 acres, and that creates $18 million extra income. That's for the whole state. That's what Lanier was talking about. A few dollars per acre may not be much, but when you aggregate it up to the state level, it can be quite a bit. That reduces emissions by about 36,000 tons and increases the net carbon footprint, or improves the net carbon footprint mainly by way of extra sequestration, by 817,000 tons. And then we have the biomass market, again with no pine and with no carbon offset, and that introduction of that new market would bring on more corn acres, because we would now harvest more corn stover, and it also brings in about 178,000 acres of switchgrass. Okay, all that to the tune of adding about $21 million worth of ag income to the state. So the introduction of both a biomass market and a carbon offset market has the potential to offset some of the losses that we might experience if we just live with the status quo and not change anything and have less water to deal with. So the combination of all three of these is the minus $78 million. So of the three effects, the biomass market, the irrigation restriction, and or the carbon offset market, obviously the groundwater availability issue is front and center in terms of ag income impact. And so I applaud all the efforts that I saw this morning in terms of saying, hey, we got to improve efficiency, and we got to get better at using water. And if we can go ahead and gain from some of those efficiency improvements also some bang for our buck with a carbon offset market, all the power to us. And if a biomass market were to come about, it seems that it might make a larger impact than the carbon offset market, at least at the prices that I've modeled stuff at here. But it's important when you're looking at this carbon offset market that you not only look at the emissions, but you also look at the sequestration side. Now that makes sense, but some policies that are floating around out there are trying to look only maybe at one side of the equation, the emission side, and I think that's a mistake. So a carbon offset program that incentivizes people to go ahead and improve the net picture, which is emissions and sequestration, is important to think about. However, one of the problems with that is that some of these carbon sequestration numbers that we're using are based on estimates that we're doing on the basis of harvest indices and shoot-to-root ratios, which are quite uncertain. So a lot of these numbers that I show you up there in terms of, well, Popp said we're going to gain $20 million if we have a carbon offset market, are based on a number of assumptions that need to be ground-proofed much more specifically.